inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Last Wednesday morning, a shooter took aim at a group of Republican congressmen practicing for a charity baseball game in Washington, D.C. 4 people, including Steve Scalise, the third-ranking Republican in the House of Representatives, were injured. The increasing coarseness and appeals to violence in our public life is certainly alarming. Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. The resort to violence in American political life is nothing new. 4 sitting U.S. presidents have been assassinated: Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and Kennedy. In the growing tension of the nation lurching toward civil war in 1856, Preston Brooks, a member of the House of Representatives from South Carolina, savagely caned Charles Sumner of Massachusetts on the floor of the U.S. Senate. More immediately, in the aftermath of the 2016 election, town hall meetings have gotten so explosive, nothing resembling a civil exchange of ideas is possible. In an environment that encourages screaming in person and online, everyone seems to revert ever more to strident rhetoric. I reached out to Congressman Brad Wenstrup, who was at that practice to be a guest this morning, but it was impossible for him to get back to Cincinnati because of the congressional charity game that was played on Thursday night. But this is too important not to acknowledge and deal with. This morning I am joined by 2 long-term elected public officials. Last December, Denise Driehaus was elected Hamilton County Commissioner, but earlier spent 8 years in the Ohio House of Representatives. Ms. Driehaus comes from a family of Democratic activists that included her father, Don, who served as the co-chair of the local Democratic Party and ran for Congress, and her brother Steve, who served in the U.S. House of Representatives for one tumultuous term when the Affordable Care Act was enacted, and Tom Brinkman, who is a member of the Ohio House of Representatives, now in his 6th term. Mr. Brinkman has been an outspoken leader of Coast and has been known as a representative who has pushed the Ohio Republican Party to the right. For both of you, welcome back to Newsmakers, and thank you for being here. Let me just start with the obvious question, Denise. What's your reaction when you heard on Wednesday about this incident?
A little bit of shock and disappointment that we still in this country have folks that are acting out violently against elected individuals. We are declining into this morass where that behavior is becoming all too commonplace, and it's so disappointing.
Tom, what about you?
Well, I wasn't so much shocked, because they seem to be going on constantly. A little bit different because the shooter had to actually track down this event. It wasn't like he just went into a crowded square and just shot away. And so maybe a little bit more insidious and
purposeful.
Yeah.
So when you two overlapped in the Ohio House for part of your terms, what was the situation there? Were there efforts to bring people together? Was there a Ohio House baseball game?
Well, when I got in, the Democrats were in a majority. Now, this was back in the day.
Barely can remember.
Me too. But we had bipartisan socials back when I was a freshman. We had 3 of them. One was a bowling match with Republicans and Democrats on the same teams bowling together, and we created these great relationships across the aisle with one another. That has since fallen off to when in my last 6 years, we didn't do so much of that, and it was disappointing because it really did bring people together and get us to view one another outside of the chamber, outside of committee meetings, as people with kids and with spouses, and it just humanizes everybody, and you get along better when you create those kind of relationships. We do have this bipartisan baseball game that we play against the Muffins. So the Democrats and the Republicans.
An old style.
Yeah, well, and the rules are very confusing, but the Democrats and Republicans are on the same team, and it's good fun. And we had about half and half Democrats and Republicans. Again, when I was a freshman and a sophomore member, my understanding is now that is not the case.
Tom,
So, yeah.
is that any longer the case? Is that a viable?
Well, it was advertised, but not well, and they didn't really have a good turnout. I think there were 3 times the muffins to the other players. But one of the things we've done in Southwest Ohio ever since I've been in there is we do come together when different groups want to visit with us and talk to us, whether it's Community Action League or the Arts Council or you name it. We have meetings with them, and we're all invited. We all can't attend every time because we have other things going on. Mm-hmm. But we've gotten to know each other through that. Now, when I hear about other sections of the state where they seem to be all Democrats or all Republicans, those same regional meetings don't have the bipartisan flair with it because they're all Republicans or Democrats. Mm-hmm. But down here, because we have a good mix, we do tend to see each other, whether it's up at UC or Children's Hospital and things like that. And the other thing is they do generally get the commissioners involved or maybe city council or so that we also meet other parts of the governmental structure, which helps a lot too. So there's just not a party resentment, but there's also not a different levels of government resentment. We know we have to work
So
together.
actually really mixing people together.
Right, right.
And, I don't, in some senses, I think local state government does operate in a little bit different dynamic than what we see maybe because the media is so focused on Washington. I think everything gets amplified there. Is that fair? Do you feel like local politics can be a little bit more civil?
I think the State House was very bipartisan. I mean, look, we didn't often win the argument as the minority members in the State House, but I had very close relationships with many of the Republicans when I was, really for the 8 years I was there, very close relationships. And so, I'm part of a civility effort that is focusing on state houses. That's intentional. They're not working at the federal level because I feel like they think they can't get anything done there because of the gridlock that you refer to. And so they have moved to the state level to say, so much of the action is at the state level, things are getting done at the state level, and there's some potential for bipartisan, pushing things bipartisan at the state level.
Yeah.
Ohio's a diverse state. A Republican from Cleveland isn't the same as a Republican from Cincinnati. Democrat, but certainly different ideas that people can line up with. And so just because of our diverse nature, I think in the state of Ohio, we have to work a little bit more across different lines.
Tom, I remember when you were reelected, because you sat out, you had served your 8 terms, right. You sat out, then you ran again, you were reelected. And in one of the interviews on this show, you said that going back in, you had a little bit different attitude than you went in with early on with your first run, you seemed a little more open. You were expressly saying you were more open right. to a variety of ideas. Do you feel like you've tried to still stay with that and work that through in these last 2.5 years?
Well, I think I have, but it's been to my detriment. I made one vote against the resolution against banning Syrian refugees into the state of Ohio. I was the only Republican to vote against that resolution. I felt, hey, they're vetted, let them come in. I almost lost my primary election that year, won by 1% on that one issue. And that's because, again, we're so driven in these primaries, the primaries make the difference. And I have still continued to reach out and do different things. As I mentioned, I spoke with my ranking member of my committee yesterday, because I just think those are the things you have to do. But it certainly has brought up some angst on the other side of my supporters, and that's changed me a lot. And that's changed me a lot. I've talked to people and I said, hey, you start trying to be a little bit more of a open to some ideas. A good example in the budget, we got rid of any prison time for F5s. These are low-level drug dealers. We don't have any room in the prisons. I had judges coming up to me, don't do that, be strong. We don't have the money. and you could be viewed as being soft on crime. Again, that's a original sin in the Republican primary. But you try to govern and do the best you can, and that opens you up to a lot of that.
I remember also that you took a stand against the death penalty at one point in your first term, out of a principle, a moral principle of what you stand, and you got a lot of criticism for that.
Right, exactly.
So what I think some of what Tom's raising here is some of the structural issues around this, and that we live in a world where districts are drawn to be safe for either Republicans or Democrats, meaning they're not very well contested. The result being that the primary is everything, as Tom was just saying. But it also drives people to the extremes.
Absolutely. The lines are drawn in that way, and so what happens is folks run in primaries, and in a primary you're not running towards the center, you're running to the extreme. And so when you have a legislature filled with people who have won these primaries, the general election means nothing in these districts because they're so heavily stacked one way or the other. You've got people now on the extremes of either side, and they don't even view, they don't want to go to the center. It doesn't benefit them to go to the center because they're going to face a primary, not a general election. That sets up a very challenging dynamic where you have very few people who are used to working in the middle, and so they don't necessarily have that skill set, and they're not driven to do it. I've run in pretty competitive races in pretty competitive districts, the county for one, and it makes you think differently about who you represent, what the issues are, there are nuances to things, and you try to kind of vet those in your own way and understand things, I think, a little differently.
There's a lot of efforts to change the way we district. Tom, do you think, first off, do you think it would be a good thing to create more competitive districts? And secondly, what's the likelihood of that getting through?
Well, again, in order to create a more competitive district, someone has to give something up for someone to get something. I've said it repeatedly. I don't think Alicia Reese, who borders me, wants to get 20,000 Republican voters so I can have 20,000 Democrat voters. So it's a two-way street, and I think both have a lot to lose in order for them to win, to make it more competitive. The other problem is we have become very isolated in, Hamilton County is becoming a blue county, but Butler, Warren, Claremont don't have a single county-wide elected Democrat. So how do you make a district that has some voters that are in Cincinnati, stretch it all the way out in the Warren County to make it be competitive? It becomes very difficult. I'll bring up another point. The city of Cincinnati is rapidly just becoming a Democrat city. I think it's 21% registered Republicans. What I see is a lot of fighting among the Democrats because they run the city. Right. I had mentioned to you that I saw one prominent attorney attacking John Cranley, both Democrats. I saw someone I know, constituent in Mount Washington, attacking Tim Burke. So maybe it's the fact that they have, just like the primaries where it's an all Republican district, so the Republicans are the fight. Cincinnati is becoming an all Democrat city, and so it seems like the fight's among those folks.
What do you think, Denise, is the role of social media in all of this? What Tom's bringing up here are two things that you saw on Facebook or Twitter recently.
Right. That's
how do you think that is changing things for the good, bad, or indifferent?
I think people are less thoughtful on social media than they might be otherwise. I think it's a very immediate reaction to things too, where people haven't, like I said, kind of thought through some things and they react immediately. But I do want to talk a little bit about this gerrymandering in the districts. I've been, you move around a lot. There are people everywhere with these the sheets where you sign and to get something on the ballot, and so people have started to understand that the gerrymandering in the districts are part of the problem, and it not only creates a very partisan electorate, a general assembly in this case, but it also is very unfair to the electorate where they want to have some balance, they want to have communities kept together, and the lines as they're drawn right now have split communities apart. It's just bad all the way around. And so these folks with the petitions are starting to get it. I mean, you start to hear that at the grassroots level. That's what it's going to take to change this. And I think it's a long road, but I think we are on the road.
So nobody's giving up 20,000 of their voters.
Well,
quickly.
you know,
But here's the problem. There's something called packing, where they would intentionally pack the Democrats and pack the Republicans, depending on who's in charge, and then have more seats for themselves. The problem is the public's already packing themselves. The Democrats are moving to the city of Cincinnati. They like that agenda. They're fine. The Republicans are moving out to another area where there's no Democrats. So there's a lot of self-packing, and how do you create districts that are going to be that long and to try to get balance? That's what I don't see will ever work.
Okay.
I mean, when you looked at what Hillary won, she won the 5 big metros in Athens County, where OU is. So to me, it's like, how do you draw districts out there to make that happen? Plus, you have the Civil Rights Act, and that can make a big difference too, with an ultimate trump card.
I'm basically out of time, but if you had to say something to your supporters about what you hoped could happen in short run, what would it be? And to deal with the civility question.
Well, it starts with yourself. You have to model behavior that you want other people to exhibit. And so we all are responsible for our own behavior and for the tone of the discourse. We have to take it personally, and we have to hold each other to that standard.
Tom?
Take a deep breath. When you see something on the news, social media, whatever, take a deep breath, wait a while, maybe a day or two, see if it really was true. So much of it is just typed up.
Well, this show is dedicated to trying to have civil conversations, and both of you have been guests many times because that's exactly what you engage in. So thank you very much for being here this morning.
Thanks,
Thank you for all the work that you do. Stay tuned after the break. Local effort that started 50 years ago that has tremendous environmental, economic, and health implications over the years. Thank you. Every week, thousands of inline skaters, walkers, cyclists head to dozens of points along the 75-mile Little Miami Trail for relaxation and exercise. This incredible resource exists in our region because of the efforts of people a half a century ago to reclaim the beauty and the functionality of the Little Miami River, resulting in the river becoming the first Ohio river to be designated a national wild and scenic river. Welcome back. The Little Miami Conservancy was founded 50 years ago in 1967, dedicated to the restoration and protection of the Little Miami Riverway as a wild and scenic river. Quite a challenge in an urbanized metropolitan region. Today, the Little Miami Incorporated owns 100 nature preserves along the riverbanks, and another 41% of the riverfront lands are protected through public and quasi-public ownership. I am joined this morning by Eric Partee, the longtime 35-year executive director of the Little Miami Conservancy. Eric, welcome to Newsmakers. As a user of the bike trail mostly, occasionally a canoeist, but mostly the bike trail on a regular basis, this is an incredible resource that cuts through in a linear way so many different municipalities, counties, townships. It really pulls people together in a completely different way.
It really does. It's really one of those environmental gems in Southwest Ohio. You mentioned it flows through got 5 different counties, 20 different townships, 12 different communities, all with their sets of long-range plans and political dynamics and agendas. But the beauty of what's happened over the last 50 years that was started back in 1967 by Glenn Thompson, who was the editor of the Dayton Journal-Herald back then, was that they saw beyond that. They saw the big vision. And of course the vision back in 1967, before there were environmental regulations, before there was a US EPA, before there was just most of the things we take for granted now, was that the vision back then was a river that was, it had some beauty to it, but it was lined with water heaters, junk cars, trash, etc. They saw beyond that and said, this is a real gem, and we need to take some action to get the organization started to make sure that it gets restored, and including water quality issues, and a variety of things.
And looking on your website, water quality today looks like it has just improved remarkably.
It's exceptional, and that's a term that Ohio EPA uses. There's habitats and rivers throughout Ohio. Little Miami is one of the top 10% streams in Ohio. Exceptional habitat and water quality has been restored. Years ago, there's 36 different sewage treatment plants that empty into the tributaries of the Little Miami directly. And there was a need to upgrade those plants, and that's been done systematically over the years, and so much so that now the river, the biology is in exceptional health. The fish are happy. We're happy. The dark green slime you don't see that hardly at all anymore, and it's a real success story.
Yeah, and it also, what strikes me is it's also an economic driver, even though it's green and it's not looking to develop right along the river.
Right.
It's not selling river views,
right.
But it is, when you see what's happening in Milford and in Loveland and all up and down in the little communities, it's pretty amazing.
It is amazing. The economic impacts of having a clean environment can't be underestimated. And that's certainly true in communities like Milford, particularly in Loveland, that years ago, you talk to people that were around 50 years ago in Loveland, downtown had some challenges facing it, and had been flooded and had economic challenges. And once when we went to Washington to get the funding for the original section of the bike trail, started in Loveland and ran up to Morrow, 13 miles, that started to change the whole dynamic for downtown Loveland. And the first restaurant was opened, mm-hmm. and the little shop was opened, and now that was done in the late 70s, early 80s, and now we're back up to a situation where we've got multiple restaurants. We've got 3 new microbreweries have opened in downtown Loveland. Outdoor fitters, outfitters for outdoor uses, and canoe liveries. It's just been great.
Well, and also north on the trail, there is the whole process that's developing with the old cartridge factory.
Peter's Cartridge, yes.
Because this is a combination of both cleanup and development, right?
Exactly. I mean, that plant that people ride their bikes by, those big buildings have been around for just over 100 years now,
mm-hmm.
and
brand new historic marker up as of this week.
It is, and there are exactly, and there are dreams of turning it into something more than just this abandoned shell of a building. And years ago, when people like Tim Burke and others were involved with the organization directly, we were able to acquire that riverfront area, which is key to any river. That riverfront protection is the absolute key to making it healthy. Did that at Peter's Cartridge, and worked with DuPont, who was charged with removing a lot of lead soils and other things in the area, particularly and even along the riverbank, and have now, working with them, restored it, to planted thousands of trees and wildflowers. It's going to be, people are going to look back 50 years from now and say, boy, those guys did a great job.
So if you're not a biker, if you're not a cyclist, and you're not out there regularly, you maybe don't see it. If you just drive by, even on the road there, mm-hmm. the amount of soil that was moved and taken away and whatever and cleaned up over the last 2.5 years,
right.
It is absolutely incredible.
When you figure they had to go down 2 and sometimes 3 feet of soil over many acres of land, that adds up real quick. And been replaced with fresh soil and vegetation and native trees. It's
hundreds and hundreds of trees.
Oh, absolutely.
And so what's next? What are some of the projects that are most important in the future?
You mentioned in the intro that if you look at the 100 miles of the Little Miami, there's about half of it now that is either owned by the Conservancy as nature preserves or local park districts, great parks of Hamilton County, Claremont County. All these partners have come together to acquire and permanently preserve these riverfront lands. We're up to about 54%. So we've got another half, we've got a few more years ahead of us to protect and lock in that protection, because those trees, as beautiful as they are, and you look at this and you canoe down to Little Miami, it's critical to have the shade, it's critical to have the protection and the bank stability. It all plays into a healthy ecosystem. So we've got some work cut out for us.
Okay, well, I want to make sure people know how to find out more about this. Find out more about the history and the offerings of Little Miami Conservancy at their website, www.littlemiami.com. And everybody's welcome any day of the week to come out and canoe, to ride, to skate, to do whatever. Just don't be there when I'm there and get in my way. Okay, thank you very much for all your work.
Dan.
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. States and localities across the United States are stepping forward with promises to pursue goals of the Paris Climate Agreement despite formal U.S. withdrawal. Join me next week when I'm joined by representatives of an organization that has made that commitment in a very dramatic sort of way. Have a good week.